what he's done with the screen is literally something that I wish everybody could experience. So what was your perspective, and then how did that clear up for you? You tell us what those spinning numbers actually look like. You tell us what they mean when it gets to you. So what did you see when you saw, this guy's supposed to be counting reps, right?
I felt fortunate.
Okay.
Because as a head trainer, therapist in charge of athletes, whether it's at high school level, college level, professional level, at a clinic, when you're trying to do the right thing for a patient, I think it's very, it's great to have an objective tool to talk to an athlete about, to talk to the parents about, to provide those numbers. So when I first walked in his office, and Jeff has not only the numbers, but what's even more impressive, just the whole curriculum that he puts together is outstanding. So I feel very fortunate in that. But it's been so, it's a great tool for athletes. The number of athletes that go in his office, in fact, my first day there, he's got 2 guys in there, and he's talking about their various numbers, where they're at. It was after the season, hey, these are your goals, this is where you're at, this is what we're going to do. Personal plan, I mean, it was a great educational tool, and athletes respond so well to that. So
they're used to stats anyway, so it's so neat to see that some of the little aches, pains, problems, workout issues they've had also have a number. It's almost like meeting Rain Man when it comes to physicality. I mean, I'd like to take a box of toothpicks and throw them on the floor right now. And he's like, 346, it's 346. He'd count them just like that.
I don't want to interrupt, he's done that.
All right, tell us what's on that sheet, because everybody's trying to figure out, I mean, what's on the sheet?
Well, some of it was kind of born out of my fear that I would not understand the system well enough, because I did not come from a physical therapy background.
Okay.
And our first talks, I knew that there was something I was missing as just a strength coach, and understanding fundamental movement was kind of that missing piece that where I was coming up short, and I had to be able to learn it myself from you. And that was kind of back in the era where there wasn't as many DVDs as you have now. There wasn't as many seminars. It was basically a lot of phone calls and trying to figure it all out. And when I did see a DVD, write it all down, rehearse it, repetition. That's the only way I could learn it, because I wanted to be well versed in it, because I had to explain it to a player and enhance my credibility with this player, because a lot of these players, they had never heard of, why do I have to step over a hurdle step? I don't have to do this, I just want to lift. And to be able to explain to them that missing piece of their overall performance package, I had to be able to be educated on it. And then to be able to teach it to an assistant, an intern, someone to come in and start to put this team approach together, because as you know, you can't do it all by yourself.
Right.
So as the thing kept evolving and started looking at different numbers, and some common results kept happening. Every year when new players came to us from colleges, our draft picks, our new players coming out of the college system, we'd screen them, about 20 to 25 guys a year. The average is 12 and a half. Every year.
21.
Right, out of the 21. Every year, it never changed, no matter if you went to college in the north, south, east, west, major college, Division III, that's what it was. But I started to notice everybody's talking about combine training. Let's get bigger, stronger, faster, but injury rates are going up. So something's missing here. And then when we go and we look at guys at the combine, well, guess what the average score at the combine is? It's not much better than 12 and a half. So seeing those numbers kind of start to repeat themselves, and understanding that there is a movement problem when guys get to our level, in order to be able to assess it, communicate it to others, communicate it to the player, and have a strategy to fix it or improve on it, I had to really just one day at a time just try to, it's basically repetition. And that's how I had to learn it. And through all that, you start to come up with some very, very compelling statistics on injury percentages, And what are those screen scores? What is the average screen score for guys that are high risk, low risk? What are some combinations of things we see on the screen right now that you and I have discussed? 75 to 80% of guys that have these two restrictions on the screen, they got hamstring histories.
Yep. One of the things that we're really capturing with the screens, we got 7 opportunities for people to show us a movement pattern. If certain signatures show up within that, those 7 little goofy movement patterns create a movement behavior pattern that is sometimes chronic hamstring, that is sometimes low back pain. And so I think the neat thing is when we just stick to doing the test, not question. I mean, how many people have ever questioned an eye chart? We read the letters, we cover this side, we cover this side, they say you got 20/20. Oh good, I got 20/20, we run off. Now if you're going to Marine Sniper School, that's a pretty important test to do before we fit you with a rifle and a scope and start shooting downwind. Because if that's a problem, it's going to create problems everywhere else in your training. That makes so much sense to everybody, yet when we sort of try to say that about movement and saying, if we identify that signature problem here, that pattern here, it's going to spin out of control with load, velocity, travel schedules, competition, adrenaline, poor recovery. It's going to spin out of control, and it could have been managed at the eye chart. So he literally, and without trying to summarize what you do, he literally takes a name of a person and profiles in numeric value the way that person's moving, so that if there's not one picture on that page, he can throw that up on a screen, and we've got a pretty good perspective of the way that person moves. As a species, we all got the same parts. There are loosey-goosey bodies and real tight bodies and asymmetrical bodies and bodies that bend in wrong places and stuff like that. But guess what? It'll only repeat itself a few times till you start to see there's not many paths that come out of this. And I've just got to categorize and group you, and I can literally manage you in a platoon of people very much like you, with some camaraderie, some competition, some perspective. And a lot of times I think one of the advantages you have is you've got a player sitting right here that's somewhat confused, and you've got one that's got 3 years under their belt that were sitting right there with that profile, and they just look over and see a certain degree of success and exhale a little bit, okay, But what do all those numbers mean? Because, he's kicking out a 12 or a 13 on a 21-point scale. We also look at asymmetries. We complement the movement screen with the Y balance test, or we complement the Y balance test with the movement screen. What can you tell us? Because he didn't just tell us there's an NFL problem. He said this starts at high school, spins out of control, and then gets recaptured as a bad pattern if they happen to have an opportunity to make $1 million. But it's going other places too.
And this is the beauty of it. It's a species-specific screen, which takes a lot of the discussions we have as sports medicine profession off the table. Well, it's not gender-specific. Right, it's not. It's species-specific. It's not sport-specific. Right, it's not. It's species-specific. So what do we know about the screen? The research has suggested, well, first of all, let's address the first issue, fundamental issue of reliability. Right? Jeff talked about working in a team approach, so you have to be reliable between people. Strong reliability, 3 or 4 studies that have shown reliability on the functional movement screen. So that's off the table, we don't have to talk about that anymore. You need to be trained in the model. That's very important to have good, solid reliability with that. Next, the question is, what about validity? What about validity of the test? 3 or 4 different populations have showed that a score of equal to or less than a 14 on the movement screen those individuals are twice as likely to be injured in the National Football League. That's the same as if you have any asymmetry on any one of the 5 bilateral tests of the FMS. Okay, so it's reliable. We know that there's some injury validity to the model. But if I couldn't change it, if this was eye color, hair color, it doesn't matter. 3 different studies have shown that the scores on the FMS are modifiable. So with a corrective exercise strategy, we would suggest that we can actually reduce an individual's risk of injury with the FMS correctives and the exercise plan. Now that's just the FMS alone. If we combine the Y balance test to that, we just have some data now that we're developing with in collegiate athletes, and what we see is that if you have basically the higher level of dysfunction, and then if you have pain on top of the dysfunction, you are just increasing your risk for injury. And that's kind of all I'll say about it right now, but it tells the exact same story. If you fail the Y balance test, which is just a little bit higher up, it's kind of like it's basically the hurdle step in a couple of different directions, so it's just a little bit higher up than a fundamental pattern. If you fail either of those, or if you have pain on that, you have an increased risk of injury. And that's using just standard statistical approaches for that. The next kind of step that we're going with this is looking, just as Jeff and Marty talked about looking at that specific population, which is often a question that comes up with in the sports medicine community of, well, what injury are you predicting? All of them, right? Okay, you want to get specific? No worries, let's do that, okay? So what we just saw in actually a group of collegiate athletes, that we had 4 prospective ACL tears. None of them had a 3 on the deep squat, none of them had a 3 on the inline lunge, and all of them had lower than a 90.3 composite score on the Y balance test, which was 5% leg length lower than their uninjured counterparts. I'm not making this stuff up. It just is what it is, and these are their inherent patterns. So as we begin to look further, as we begin to increase our sample size, we'll start looking at specific issues. But as myself from a coaching background, I didn't care if the person on the bench had an ACL tear, had a hamstring injury, had a quad strain, had an ankle sprain. If I could use them in the game, that's all I cared about. And that's what the model picks up.
It's neat because people get so caught up in the FMS kit, the structure of doing the Y balance. Really all we did is created a way that somebody entering into this could see some of the things that some of our better mentors used to do intuitively. We probably all stood next to a martial arts instructor or track coach that can actually see a stride problem at speed. This is intuition at its best. But what they're literally doing is deconstructing movement, which is what we're doing by making you stand on one leg and reach in 3 different directions. Go through some movement patterns that are more based on fundamental stuff. So really, if you're intuitive, and you can see this stuff without using the jigs and the kits and stuff like that, have at it. You won't have any numbers, but you'll have some pretty good results. I'm not discounting that at all, because I've had an opportunity a few different times to go into situations where there was no previous knowledge of the movement screen. And yet when I had an opportunity to take screen samples of that population, I saw better than average movement screens. I'll tell you right now, Mike Boyle was doing that 10 years ago. And it's because he had this sound fundamental velocity. Was it a program? Yeah, it was a damn good program. And it really produced, I think, a slightly better result than I had seen in other places. I also saw it when I met the guys in the RKC community. They literally had some things, some speed bumps, if you will. You can't do this until you can do that. And so I have seen pretty respectable screen scores come from places that didn't automatically use the screen. My only warning there is it came in both cases from 2 experts in the field. Experts that are known way outside of their zip code, with many battle wounds and mistakes behind them. If you ain't them, you might want to use a screen. Okay, so the well-worn path that their mind travels every day to generate good movement is something that you may want to use a map for a little while. So that's all this to be said. If you can see that stuff without the Y balance test or the screen, then I'm sure that your results and your injury stats and your performance and street cred will speak for itself.
Yeah, I think the one thing from that is, as you mentioned, those individuals who've been looking at that for a long time, right? Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 derivations or repetitions in something to be an expert in. The idea is those individuals are still looking at what we would consider kind of movement blood pressure, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just take this issue off the table. In this fundamental movement strategy, whether it's using the FMS or some other model, let's take fundamental movement off the table. Now the problem comes when those gurus can't travel with all of the individuals around the country to be screened, which is where the system comes into play so much. So I don't have to worry about an FMS score, whether it's done in New England or whether it's done in the Southwest. In the end, we're still looking to take just what is that movement blood pressure? What's that baseline? Let's clear you for this. right? As we look to kind of a lot of the jump landing interventions, jump landing, maybe it's a very good program, it's been very successful, but let's take the fundamental movement, the neurodevelopmental pattern, the squat, the hurdle step, the crawling patterns that you had when you were 10 months, 12 months old, off the table before we look to those higher level patterns.